Good morning. We got to get the energy in the room. The energy is in the room. Welcome to the State of OpenCon 2023. What an amazing conference that we have here so far. I can't believe that it's only been 10 weeks. As Amanda said, my name is Damani Corbin, and I am leading the strategy out of the open source program office at the Boeing Company. Thank you to my colleagues in the UK who came to join me. I met Amanda at this conference, and in her passive-aggressive way, I came off stage. I just finished the talk, and she grabbed me by my arm, and she says that I'm planning a little conference. Everything's not together. It's going to be in a couple of weeks, but you have to speak. You have to be here. By the time we finished speaking, she already had spoke to my boss. Everything was in motion, and she was rolling. For the past 3 weeks, I've been traveling. I've been at different conferences. I see some faces in the crowd. Kudos to you international speakers who get a chance to do it. Last week I was at the Cloud Native Security Conference in Seattle. I see Liz Rice, I seen Colleen, I seen some familiar faces who were there, but we got to stop and say thank you to the supporting cast that allow you to do these things. So I want to say thank you to my wife. She's home with our children, ensuring that you get a chance to travel and do these things. So I want to stop and say thank you. And I want to remind you to make sure. I also wanted to remind you to stop to say thank you to the invisible roles. There's always the roles. When you see a conference like this, we forget about the sound, we forget about the lighting, we forget about the janitors, we forget about the roles that are not in the forefront. But anytime there's a production of this magnitude in general, we need to stop to make sure that we're saying thank you along the way. And that's something I want to start by saying thank you to Amanda, her amazing team, for all of the work she's done to make such a great experience over the next 2 days. So at Boeing, from the most executive role to the most starting role, they have something that we call our diversity blueprint. And what it is a one-page PowerPoint presentation where you talk about where you've been, how you've got there, you add some pictures, and then at the end of it, and you go through it with your team, or you go through it and you kind of talk about that. And it's a culture of diversity that I've seen, that I've been really impressed being at Boeing, to see that type of culture be trickled down to such a large organization. And then the last question on that diversity blueprint is, what does diversity mean to you? And on mine, I said, here's what diversity means to you, means to me. And this is something that I think that you can take for diversity, but it can also work in the software community as well. I say, invite me to the party. Teach me your dance, but then go the extra mile and learn my dance. Over time, we've realized that diversity has been a force multiplier. It's been at the heart to increase innovation by opening up the doors to underrepresented communities. In the United States, the month of February, we celebrate Black History Month, where we take the time to recognize the achievements of the African American community in the US. I know here in the UK, that's done in the month of October, but just as how we've realized what has happened in that type of community, we need to also realize that the 80-20 rule still exists. In the open source community, there's about 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And major organizations like Boeing are utilizing a ton of open source software. And we got to realize to change the narrative a little bit to how can we do a better job at supporting the community. So that's what we've been doing here. In 2023, the White House has mentioned that it's going to be the year of open science. So I did some research to kind of really understand how that was going to play in. And what really happened when they spoke about open science was they wanted to decouple the research funding from what's happening so that we can move from the theoretical to the practical. So what was happening is that you realize that there's a bunch of hobbyists getting involved with science, and they realize that if only the folks who were getting the funding to do the research, you weren't being able to capitalize off of the inertia of just the mass majority of people that could contribute. So they kicked off this 5-year strategy of this year of open science, and people don't understand what's happening. There isn't transparency. There isn't reproducibility inside of science. So as a whole, collectively, we can't really hit those strides that we want to get to. So as I looked at the brief and I understood what was going on, I realized that data and open source software were critical pieces to science hitting that stride. Because if you don't have the data that's open, then people can't really get involved and collaborate if the data is not open. But then also, if you have only proprietary software that allows you to manipulate the data or work with it, then that's also a catch-22. So you're really not open and transparent to allowing people to use it. So you need open data and you need open source software available to really hit that stride from a open science perspective. And just open hardware. These aren't things that are being talked about today, but I'm happy that this conference is tying all these critical tracks together to ensure that we'll be able to advance collectively. At this time, I wanted to play a video. What you just saw was our high-fidelity digital twin team at Boeing changing the game in how we interact with different entities within inside of the company. That is built on Unreal Engine. It's not open source, it's open core. Open core is still open. I didn't want you guys to beat me up and so I just wanted to be clear. But what's happening there is it's really expensive to train. It's really expensive to change the way to actually get people inside of a cockpit to be able to demonstrate different products internally. So what they did was to start creating different platforms to integrate with other teams. So when we launched the open source program office, this team reached out to us to share some of the great things that's been doing across the organization. And this is the power of really building communities. When we talk about building communities, we did a little bit of research from some of the largest organizations to realize that 1 out of every 6 developers contribute back to open source projects. So if you look at a large organization and your open source policies aren't really sustainable, then you're missing out on those engineers, those developers that are naturally probably contributing back to the communities. So when we launched our open source program office in Boeing, there was 3 things that I evangelized and things that I tried to implement. The first was, how do we make it easier for our developers to consume open source software? How do we cut down a little bit of the red tape tape? How do we lower some barriers? 2 is, how do we allow developers to contribute back to open source projects? What can we do to allow them to participate with inside of the communities? And then 3 is, how can we focus on inner sourcing so that we can take advantage of some of the great things that are happening internally? And those are the 3 points that I went around the organization just having conversations with different folks and focus on those 3 things. So last year, we joined the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We also joined the ELISA Foundation, Enabling Linux and Safety Applications. But we just did not join these organizations. We also launched and got involved in the working groups, because that's really where the things happen. So within the CNCF, we were the founding member of the Transportation Working Group. Within inside of ELISA, we launched the Aerospace Working Group. And hopefully we can pull on other partners that are in the space to continue to take advantage of some of the great engineering talent that you have internally. But these are some of the ways that we can be able to support the community. And lastly, before I leave, I say this: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I'm telling you to get your plan in place. I mentioned the year of open science. It was a 5-year strategy, that was put in place. Open source is not a fad. It's not going anywhere. What can you do to help put a strategy in place? I have 2 numbers on the board there: 525,600. What is that? 525,600 minutes. Those are the minutes in a year. Those are the minutes in a year. What are we doing this year that we can be able to pull out to be able to make an advance forward? And then I have 86,400 are the seconds in a day. Over the next 2 days, what can you do to pull out some content from this conference that you can take back to your organization so that you can be able to affect change? So before you leave here today, make sure that you guys are the change makers inside the room. So do what you can to enable change within inside of your organization. Thank you so much.